Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Next Gen Game Plan, a podcast for future sports leaders. I'm your host, Tyler Darr, and on this podcast, I'll be interviewing sports industry professionals to learn more about their career paths and what advice they have for those looking to break into sports. Today, we'll be joined by Gabby Pitera. Gabby Pitera is a graduate from the University of Arizona in 2022. She's been recruiting for almost 4 years now and has spent the last 2 years with the Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx. Gabby, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast with me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. No complaints.
Amazing. All right, Gabby, to start us off, could you tell us about your background and your journey of how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, so like Tyler, like you said, I graduated from University of Arizona in 2022. I did come back to Minnesota just because this is where my family is. So I'm born and raised in Minnesota, came back after school and have been here since. But I quite literally had no idea what I wanted to do after school. And I think that's a really, really common place to be when you graduate. I chose the communications route because I knew I actually originally wanted to be an accountant and then quickly figured out I cannot sit behind a computer and punch numbers all day. I like to talk too much. So communications it was. It's a pretty broad field. You can do a lot in there. So that's what really spoke to me. When I graduated, I was actually coaching youth basketball with my mom, and we got to do an event with the Timberwolves. So that's how I got introduced to some of the individuals at the organization. They suggested that I apply for a part-time game night position that had a lot of overlaps with the coaching I'd been doing. So ended up applying to that, got that position. While I was working part-time, I was actually working full-time for a pretty large recruiting agency called Aerotech. It was very sales-based, very transactional. It was some phenomenal experience. But while I was doing that and working part-time for the Wolves, my current position opened up. And I'd already gotten really familiar with the organization, a lot of individuals. So went through that interview process, got the position, and here I am.
Amazing. No, that's really cool to see how the stones kind of fell in place for you, and that it kind of started with your mom and back home. Really cool experience and cool to see how you got to where you are now. And then being a talent acquisition coordinator,
Yeah.
what does this role entail and what are some of your main responsibilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it honestly changes every day. No day is the same. That's kind of inevitable, I think, in the sports industry. It's a really fast-paced, just chaotic environment, so you got to kind of move with it. I mean, my biggest goal is to help build the workforce externally and internally. So I'm the one conducting those phone screens. I'm kind of coaching the hiring managers through the interview process all along the way as well. Screening through sometimes up to like 300-400 resumes a day. Lot of resumes across my desk. And then I also go to a lot of internal or external career fairs. So meet with community members, let them know what we offer as a career opportunity for the Timberwolves. That information isn't super public. So I like to kind of be that voice and just make sure people know that, we have normal jobs too. And then I also do a lot of internal planning. So if a lot of our employees are interested in development or they, want to get a promotion and are unsure what they need to do to get there, I am having those conversations, working with their managers to, gauge what skills do we need to work on? Is this possible? And really just being kind of upfront.
No doubt. No, that's awesome. HR is super important. And kind of like you said, it seems like it's very flexible, just like any position in sports. But that's really cool to see how you get involved with so many people. When you first began your time with the Timberwolves, you were working part-time as a group events assistant. How were you able to establish yourself and work your way into the full-time position you're currently in now?
Yeah. So the part-time position I had was actually supporting the sales team. And it was funny because in my former full-time job, it was so sales-based, and I just realized that wasn't something that was for me. It wasn't something I was ever going to excel at. But I really just used that in to put myself out there. I ended up getting connected with our recruiting manager through an event that I'd met through the Timberwolves. It's called Wise. But I really just had as many conversations as I could, introduce myself to as many people as possible, ask them questions about what they do, how they got to where they are today. If you ask people how they got into sports, you will probably never hear the same story twice. So it's really cool to just learn, how to carve your own path. That was really, really helpful. But taking that initiative and just not being afraid of someone being like, hey, I can't talk right now, really helped a lot. And it's, the sports industry is competitive. So it does get to the point where who can really, really benefit you. Yeah, making those connections will never hurt. That's something I took, and I think that's really what I owe to having this position now.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are trying to do this, they can kind of tell like making those connections, building those relationships can really be the difference maker in breaking in versus not. So that's really cool to hear. What are some ways that college students can set themselves up for a career in sports?
Yeah, that's a great question. The sports industry is interesting. I think when you think of careers in sports, you think of coaching, being a player, even like sales or marketing. At the end of the day, we are a revenue generating business. We have all the facets that, need to play into that revenue generation. I think a good place to start is to start with what you have. Start with what are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? If that's talking to people, if that's volunteering, if that's building things, start with those skills. Figure out what career paths, even outside of sports, encompass those skills. How can you keep building on experience? How can you keep building on those skill sets? When I'm recruiting for a position, and yes, recruiting for, job titles play a part, but I'm recruiting for specific skill sets. But like I said, we need people that can help us generate revenue. So knowing what you bring to the table, and why I say figure out what you're good at and what you like to do is because if your first position out of college, it might not be your career path for life, but you very well might be in that career path for the next 5 to 10 years. So it's important to be picky at this stage in your career and figure out, where you want to spend the next significant amount of time, what you want to do. Yeah, I think be intentional.
I think that's great advice. And it's cool to see, those skill sets, like you said, are oftentimes more important than the actual position title itself, because that's more transferable at the end of the day. And then you kind of touched on that, building on the skills idea. What specific skills do you believe are important for people to be successful in the sports industry?
Aside from the skills needed to do your essential job function, we touched on it a little bit before, but it's a chaotic industry. And with that adaptability, you'll almost always be asked to do stuff that's outside of your job description. Another part is a team player. Being a team player is massive, I think, in this industry. But I'd say the adaptability, the team player, and then initiative too. We're a very progressive industry. There's not a roadmap for how to be successful, how to run a team correctly. Whereas, in the insurance industry, there's a little more information on what works, what doesn't. So being able to take that initiative and kind of throw yourself into the flames to see what works and what doesn't is really valuable. We need people to do that, and we need people that are willing to.
No doubt. Leadership is super important. Being flexible in such a fluid environment, all that stuff that you touched on is really important in the sports industry. And then you've had a variety of professional roles throughout your career, and I know you've been in recruiting for a handful of years, but you did not originally start in a sports-related position. How is working in sports compared to your time working for organizations, other industries?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to bite my tongue here a little bit. It's a double-edged sword. I always say, we're a revenue generating business, just the same as any other company, but there's a lot of nuances that go into sports that you don't find elsewhere. There's a lot of niche positions that go into the sports industry. We have a corporate partnerships team that's a sales and marketing facet that you don't find at a lot of other companies. We have, our basketball operations team, our sports analysts, our coaches. You don't interact with those types of individuals at every company. So there's a lot of nuances that way. My role is also very people facing. So a big part of my job is figuring out how to communicate with different people. And, our business intelligence director has a very different communication style than our assistant coaches do. So it's a lot of navigating the kind of ebbs and flows of the environment. But it's also super exciting. It's really fast paced. It's really cool on a weekend, I'm still almost watching work. Like I'll watch a game, and it's interesting when the company you work for is so ingrained into the community that you live in. It's just everywhere. But it's also really fulfilling to say, like, I have a front row seat to that organized chaos, and I help. I don't affect the product on the court by any means, but I help make the product on the court possible, which is cool.
Absolutely. I think like having that impact on such a big organization, and like you said, the fact that organization brings so many people in the community together, it's really special. And while it is a business, it's very it's unique in its own sense compared to many other like typical organizations would be.
I will say too, I think as an organization, we take that responsibility really seriously. I'm being a community player, for example, like we assign our employees like 3 days a year where they can go volunteer somewhere and still get paid for the day. We also do a lot of initiatives as a company where we go get our hands dirty in the community, and being from this community, it's really cool to see how they've helped grow it. But I also think that's something that not a lot of other companies have to do. Just because a company is based somewhere doesn't mean they'll get their hands dirty in that community. In a sense, we're a face of Minnesota fans. So being able to give back is really big. And it doesn't matter what you do for the company, you're a part of that mission.
Absolutely. As a whole, it just brings you guys together even more. And it also just goes to show that, having a strong culture and like mission like that is just so important in, your guys' success as a whole. And then building on that, how do you believe people can stand out in the application and interview process when they're applying for jobs in the sports industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think And that's kind of a hard one to answer. You know, we do get quite a few applicants. I think from an entry level standpoint, say you just graduated college, when I'm looking at a resume, I want to see your college experience first. That's a really big accomplishment, graduating from a university or a college. And that's probably the most applicable accomplishment that you have at that point in your career. So that should be front and center when someone opens your resume. In order to stand out, I think it is important to make connections. Use your resources. Building a network is so important in any industry, in any job. But lean on your connections. Your connections also have a network. So you can put not only your network to work, but your network's network to work, if that makes sense. I know when I was a part-time position, I looked at my manager and I asked him, who do you know that aligns with what I want to do that I can talk to? And that's how you really make an intentional network and get your name in front of people's minds. Also, just knowing what you want to do, knowing yourself is really important in an interview. For example, if you're like talking about your experience, and an interviewer can tell if you really know what you've done and if if it's how like hard hitting it is. So just being really familiar with yourself, what you're good at, definitely helps you stand out.
100%. Kind of like you said, it's super competitive. And at the end of the day, everybody's going to have a pretty strong resume if they're going to try and get into these positions. And I think that intentionality you discussed is really big because it just can take you so far and really help you build those relationships.
I also think it's really important when you're in an interview, you should be interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. You owe it to yourself to vet out who's gonna be able to foster a nurturing and developing place for you to grow into your career. And I love that the recent generation, especially I think after COVID, has gotten really inquisitive in interviews. Yes, we need you to come do the job, but you also need to figure out where you want to go spend 40 hours a week.
That's a great point because at the end of the day, you have to fit where you're going and they have to be a fit for you as well. It goes both ways.
Mhm.
But you've been working as a youth basketball coach for the past handful of years. What has that experience been like for you, and what has it meant to you personally?
Yeah, it's a game that, I'm surrounded by basketball nearly 24/7. So at the end of the day, my goal was as long as these girls leave the season still in love with the game, they don't need to, want to go play D1 basketball. But as long as they love the game, they grew as a person in some capacity. I did my job. And I think it's also just been really cool to kind of be that example of like, hey, there are crazy jobs out there. You don't need to go be an accountant because it's a safe career path. You can dream a little bit. You can go see those like weird nuanced positions that no one really knows exist, and you can do it.
Amazing. I feel that you're clearly like empowering others, and the fact that you're taking your passion for basketball and passing it on to other people like that, especially the younger generation, including young girls, is extremely important. And it really is really cool to see how you're leveraging what you're doing now into people who could potentially be doing stuff that you're doing right now in the future.
Yeah, thank you.
And then, is there a particular moment, achievement, or relationship that stands out to you as a true launch point for your success in your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say it was a few months ago. We went through a whole bunch of organizational changes. So my workload, just the kind of seniority of my workload increased pretty quickly. And we were looking for a senior corporate counsel or a senior lawyer in a sense to come in-house. The hiring manager was our current general counsel, and she was very, very, out on what she wants us to do. But there was one point where she looked at me and was kind of like, well, what do you think we should do? And I was sitting here like, what the imposter syndrome kind of took over. But at the end of the day, went back to the, hey, I do this every day. I know what we should do. Just kind of trusted my gut and went with it. That was a really cool point where I realized I can be a trusted resource for this company. So that was one where I think, and that one just comes to mind, but there's a lot of, I think, moments where the imposter syndrome kicks in, and it's almost a fake it till you make it, go for it. And you come out of almost every single one of those situations going, okay, like I can do this. I know what I'm doing. I'm in this industry for a reason. I'm in this position for a reason.
Absolutely. No, for sure. I feel like sports is such a flexible environment, and you're not always going to know. And that's just part of the nature of the business. Everybody's figuring it out.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, you worked hard. You put yourself in that position. You should be proud of yourself for that. And that's really cool to see that you kind of recognize that in that moment.
Just another one of those points too. I think it's really easy to get caught up in the day-to-day work, especially because it's so fast-paced and there can be a lot thrown at you on a day-to-day. Our offices are connected to the practice court, so sometimes I'll be walking to go fill up my water, and there's Anthony Edwards shooting with his coach, and that's one of those moments where you have to step back and be like, okay, this is a really cool job. I'm really lucky to have this job. That's another one of those moments where you're like, I did this.
Absolutely. You kind of have to take it all in and appreciate, you worked hard to get yourself into a position that so many people want to be in.
For sure.
And then to finish off the episode, if you could give one piece of advice to someone looking to break into the sports industry, what would it be and why?
I would say don't panic. I think it's so easy to get your sights set on one specific goal, and that's great. I think being goal oriented is a really valuable character trait in life, but it's so easy to get discouraged. So be open minded. I worked externally in a completely different industry and then pivoted towards sports. That's really, really common. So focus on the skill sets and what you want to do. At the end of the day, working in an industry that you love is going to have a really big impact on your job. But what you're doing on a day-to-day basis is going to have the biggest impact on, do you enjoy your job? Do you feel fulfilled in your job? So focus on that first. You have the rest of your life to work. You have, so long to get to where you need to be. Don't rush it. It's so cliche, but especially I think in the job market, what's meant to be will be. You'll find someone that you're meant to work with. If you don't get the position, for all you know, you would have hated it in 2 months. Don't panic. Trust your gut. Give yourself grace.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super important. You can't be too hard on yourself. And kind of like you said, it's more of a marathon than a race. It's a long-term journey. There's going to be things that happen along the way. You don't have to end up immediately where you want to end up right out of college or right when you get started in the industry. So I think that's great advice.
Definitely.
Well, everyone, that will do it for this episode. Today, we were joined by Gabby Pitera, the talent acquisition coordinator for the Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx. Gabby, thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate you joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Tyler. It was awesome.
I would like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to this episode. I hope you found it interesting and ultimately took something away that will help you in the next steps of your journey. And with that, we will see you next time on the Next Gen Game Plan, a podcast for future sports leaders.